But really, I want to believe that the individual consumer has the ability to affect change with how they spend their money. And my only hope by writing Worse on Purpose is that we make people think a little bit harder every time they buy something, because there are good alternatives out there. And I really think that's how we can affect change in this domain, because the government ain't going to do shit for us, it seems like.
Hello and welcome. I'm Zahra Sethna, and this is Collapse Life, a podcast about what's breaking, why it's happening, and what, if anything, we can still do about it. Before we jump in, please take a moment to hit those like and subscribe buttons. So, we're entering a world in which replacing things is becoming harder. When money is tight and supply chains are unreliable, we need the things we own to last as long as possible. But increasingly, it seems like the opposite is happening. Our guest today is Keyana Sapp, the writer behind an independent newsletter called Worse on Purpose, which investigates how the things we buy are getting worse, who's profiting from that decline, and how consumers can tell whether a product is still worth buying. Keyana, welcome to Collapse Life.
Thank you so much for having me, Zara. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. I know this newsletter is fairly new, and I think it has struck a chord. So tell us a little bit about Worse on Purpose and what led you to start tracking this.
Yeah, so you said it perfectly in the intro. Worse on Purpose is a investigative newsletter along with a public database that we call the Brand Ledger. And essentially what we do is track product quality decline, the acquisitions behind it, the ownership changes, and we provide a public record that consumers can very easily check in order to track those changes as they're making purchasing decisions.
And what was the impetus behind it? Because it seems very useful. And as I said, obviously, you're getting quite a good reaction to it, which we'll get into. But what made you kind of want to focus on that very specific niche?
Yeah, I mean, really, it all started from, I would say, just a personal frustration. I noticed something that I think a lot of people have noticed, which is simply that the things that they buy today really don't resemble the things that they bought yesterday, even if they're coming from the same brand and are ostensibly the same product. And there was a specific case. I was in the market for a new backpack. I had had the same JanSport bag ever since I was in high school, essentially, and it lasted sort of 10, 12 years, something like that, and was falling apart. And so I was looking to replace that bag. And when I was in an REI store, comparing options, looking at the old JanSport bag I had, it just felt like a completely different product. The stitch counts seemed far less robust. The actual material itself seemed thinner. So I remember going home after that and looking online and seeing what was happening. And I discovered this story that VF Corp, a brand or a conglomerate based in Denver, had spent the previous couple decades buying up virtually every backpack brand that you recognize in the market: Eastpak, JanSport, North Face, a bunch of others. And really, I was completely unaware of that sort of trend. And so I typed all of this up on Reddit, posted it in r/buyitforlife, and the post ended up going totally viral. It was clear to me that a lot of people weren't aware of that story either. And so that was kind of the first seed planted for me. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then I remember coming across a story about the glasses industry. Excelsior Luxottica owns, basically every frame brand that you've ever heard of: Purcell, Ray-Ban, Oliver Peoples, a bunch of them. But the crazy thing about that industry is that they also own the retail outlets, Sunglass Hut, iBuyDirect, as well as the insurance providers that funnel you into those outlets as well. So that was another story that I came across, within a couple of weeks of that backpack run. Again, I wrote that up on Reddit, and again, it went totally viral. And so at that point, I was like, well, maybe there's a story here, maybe there's a trend. And so started looking into other industries, and also decided that I would start writing these up in a bit of a more formalized, well-researched way. And so, started going down the list of industries, covering appliances, cookware, all kinds of different categories. And in every case, it seemed like people were not aware of those stories of consolidation and how they affected the products. And it seemed to me that in every case, that was the story behind the decline. And it's just been totally crazy, the response so far.
I think it's fascinating, and I think that's what makes this so interesting. Is that a lot of people would say yes, things are um, poorer quality than they used to be, and that boils down to just trying to maximize profits. And it's more than that. So, as you just mentioned, so much of what you're uncovering here is about consolidation and about ownership. And so, help people understand how those two are connected, how a decline in quality and a consolidation of ownership kind of come together. Because I think a lot of people will probably just sort of quickly dismiss this as corporate greed, maximize profit, move on. But there's really something interesting to unpack here.
Yeah, and it's certainly a very complex question, and it's sort of a philosophical question I'm still kind of grappling with, like what quality is exactly. When we say, oh, our products are getting worse, they're declining in quality, like what does that actually mean? It's not really a very simple question. But the simplest way I can sort of put my answer to that is that quality is really a function of care, and that's all the way down the production line, as it were. So what happens when ownership is transferred is that it becomes very difficult to maintain care. When a new owner takes over, they lose the connection to the original product, first of all, that was there in the first place, but also to the original customers and the reputation that was built around the brand. And so it becomes very difficult to maintain a level of care that maintains quality in the long term when ownership has been transferred. And that applies like all the way down the chain to from the manufacturers, but also the people selling the product, the people marketing the product. If they don't have that connection to the original, way the product was made and founded, the only thing they prioritize is the numbers on the spreadsheet, which is quite understandable. There's no intrinsic connection to the product there that will lead to quality being maintained. So it's sort of a natural decline when ownership changes. The quality, the connection to the product is the intangible that gets lost. It's the thing that can't be measured, and so it's kind of a necessary decline when ownership transfers, as far as I can tell.
I think what's really interesting as well, just from those three quick examples that you gave us, is that as a consumer, you may be looking at different brands thinking that they're actually competitors to one another when
Right.
actually they're really falling under the same ownership umbrella. Excuse me. I'm um I'm just recovering from a bit of a chest cold, so excuse me as
No
I
worries.
catch my breath. Um, so talk a little bit about that from the consumer standpoint when we look at two different brands and we weigh up which one we want to buy, but we don't know that actually the ultimate owner is the same. Is there still a choice that we're making?
Well, I mean, in many cases, I think standing in the aisle, first of all, the consumer is completely unaware of these sort of ownership hierarchies and who owns what. I think in many cases, actually, the consumers aren't even thinking that there might be a parent company above the brand level. They're not, when they're making their purchasing decisions, there's a rarely a criteria that they're considering, like who is the ultimate parent company. And so that's really one of the aspects of consumer behavior that I kind of want to affect with everything that I'm writing. When you are looking into a new product and a new category, I think it is an important question to ask yourself, are the people who made this product in the first place, the people who invented it, are they the ones who still control the decision making about how the product is made today? If so, you can be pretty confident that the level of care and quality associated with the product are going to be quite high. If that's not the case, that's probably when you should start asking questions and actually, examining the product and seeing how it's changed over time. But that's not a very easy thing to do when you're in a rush and you're standing in, the aisle at the store. And so that's why part of the reason why I built the ledger, so people even in that situation can very quickly look up a brand, see the hierarchy, and base their decisions based on that.
Are there any industries that you've started to look at where there are holdouts, where there are kind of founders or family ownership still existing, or has this become pervasive across every industry you've seen?
I mean, the consolidation playbook is certainly pervasive, but I would also say the holdouts and the standouts are also equally pervasive. In every industry, you're going to find, companies that have been bought up and rolled up 100 times, and the product is just nowhere near what it was when it built the reputation in the first place. But then also there are both smaller independents, maybe newer companies that are doing things right and have made public commitments. Things like, we'll never offshore manufacturing, we'll never, dilute our ownership, whatever it might be. So there are those, but then also there are equally, massive family-owned businesses that have been around for hundreds of years that have never sold their ownership and have always maintained ownership within the family as well. And I think those are great companies to purchase from as well, because the incentives are totally aligned. They own everything, that the reputation that they've earned over, in many cases, 100+ years is the most valuable asset of the business, and that they won't sell it out. The business is structured in such a way to where that's impossible. So certainly there are holdouts in every business, but you're absolutely right in saying the strategies are also incredibly pervasive. So there isn't a market I've come across where there hasn't been any consolidation at all.
I think people are quite aware of it, especially when it comes to, say, the food industry, because there has been so much reporting on consolidation in food and supermarkets and things like that. But when it comes to some of the industries that you've been looking at, like eyewear, footwear, cookware, things like that, that's where it actually does come as a bit of a surprise. And I think one of the behaviors that you're trying to dislodge is this sense of brand loyalty that we have psychologically. So, for example, one of the first expensive pairs of sneakers that I ever bought was a pair of Sauconys, and I loved them, and they were fantastic. It was like walking on a cloud. And so, still to this day, 25, 30 years later, I will be drawn towards a pair of Sauconys, even if they're at Costco for $11.99, because I remember that first pair that I had that was so great. And I know consciously that the pair that I buy for $11.99 is not the same, and it's not going to feel or wear the same, but I still have that attachment. Is there a piece of that you've been looking at or that you've been uncovering as you do this work?
Well, I think one thing I would say on that point is, look, human beings are social species, and as a result of that, reputational loyalty is something that's hardwired into our minds. It's one of the core sort of social mechanisms at play, both with how we relate to each other. So, the more good things I do towards you, the more good things I'll get in return. The same applies to brands. If they treat customers well over the long term, customers will treat those brands well as well. And so the last thing I would want to do is sort of break that connection, especially for all the new independent or family-owned brands that have been running for a long time. I wouldn't want to say that you should never trust anyone selling you anything. That isn't the point I'm trying to make. The only point I'm trying to make is that looking at ownership is important, because you're loyal to the owners of the brand, not the brand itself. You're loyal to the people making decisions, behind the curtain. And so if that ownership has changed, at that point, you're not loyal to anything associated with that brand anymore. Maybe, the new owners, if they don't change anything with the manufacturing and all they've done is take over the assets and they've kept everyone in place and the whole operation is exactly the same, maybe you can build trust again with those new owners after a couple purchases. But I would say as soon as that ownership transfer happens, the trust is lost and you need to rebuild it again. And so, my point is definitely not to say that you should never trust any brand or anyone selling you anything. Ultimately, we live in a capitalist system, and that's a capitalist system is just an extension of our psychology at the scale of a society. And so those same patterns exist everywhere. Trust is important, and you should certainly trust brands if they deserve it. Yeah.
Right. Well, that kind of leads to the on purpose part of the name of your newsletter, because, we've talked about the worse and everybody kind of knows that intrinsically, but on purpose is quite provocative, because that's sort of suggesting that there's conscious decisions to make bad products or products that are not as good as they used to be.
Yeah.
Do you think that is what's actually happening, or is it just economies of scale? Is it just supply and demand? People will buy it no matter what the quality is. I mean, you talked a little bit about that, building back that trust, but talk a little bit about the on purpose piece.
Yeah, absolutely, and it certainly is a provocative title. I won't, I won't downplay that. Yes and no. There are aspects to where it is on purpose, and then there are aspects to where the consciousness behind those decision makings is kind of perfectly understandable when you understand the incentives behind it. And so, I guess the best way to answer that question is talk a little bit about when brands get sold, right? And I think a lot of my readers are under the impression that these financiers somehow, swoop in and they buy these like trusted brands, and the owners just give up control and they don't know what's happened, and then suddenly there's new ownership, and it's been like a hostile takeover. Usually that is not the case. Usually a brand that built a reputation over a long period of time falls into a period of underperformance, whether that's because the founders, they've retired out, or maybe it's just started to be mismanaged. For whatever reason, it's not performing the way that it was, but it still has this incredibly valuable asset, which is its reputation that it's built over a long period. At that point, a financier will come in when the business is not doing very well. Maybe the founders are retiring, maybe they've died, they don't have anyone who wants to replace or take up the reins. And so the alternative is this company is going out of business, or a financier can come in and pick it up. And so when the financiers come in, what happens is they have a distressed asset and they want to take it to market again. So in most cases, what they're doing is not rebuilding the manufacturing processes. They're not rebuilding the original manufacturing processes. All they're doing is taking the brand and remanufacturing it with someone else. And so obviously all of those things are conscious decisions, but the alternative was that the brand would cease to exist. And so I think in many cases, people think like there's been this hostile takeover and then these financiers are just ruining the quality of the brand. Really, the reality is they see an opportunity in a market that otherwise would go to zero, and they see a path to extracting some kind of value out of it. Obviously, there are concerns with that because it's not like they're telling consumers that this is a completely new product that has no relation to the original and all of that. They're riding on that consumer reputation, but it's not like they took over the business and then just changed everything overnight and got rid of all the manufacturing practices and all of that. So I think it's yes and no. Obviously, like also when you take over a business, you don't have any connection to the customers that existed in the business. Everyone is just a one and a zero on a spreadsheet. And so in a financial arrangement, when you have investors, when this is what you're doing, obviously all you want to see is the margin numbers and the profit numbers go up, and you'll take sort of any approach to do that. And so the incentive for the financier and the incentive for the original owner is just a completely different business, and they're operating it completely differently. And that's really where the divide is. And so yes, it's on purpose, but it's not like this sort of evil, I guess, conspiracy, as
Right.
it were.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, obviously, if there's any value to the brand, then it's worth buying out. If the brand has already degraded to a point where the quality is so poor, it's not going to be
Precisely.
there's not going to be any value in taking over that company. But of course, in order to bring it back to some kind of viable state, they need tactics to lower cost and be able to kind of balance that back out. So what kinds of tactics have you seen in your investigations that that have flowed up in terms of the degradation that we see in the products that we buy? Outsourcing, cheaper materials, things like that. Just talk a little bit about how you go through these investigations and what you've found.
Yeah, so there's been a ton of different tactics, and I think these are really interesting to readers because once you sort of understand them, you start spotting them out in the market, and it sort of becomes it's like a Baader-Meinhof thing. It becomes really obvious every time you see this. And so I'll talk through some of these mechanisms, but I also have a piece that I have published that I keep up to date. So whenever I come across new ones, I throw them in this piece. So maybe we can link that for readers as well. But to give you the high-level overview, there's 7 or 8 mechanisms that I've kind of uncovered. So the first is what I call reputation laundering. So this is essentially what we've been talking about just now. A brand builds a reputation over the long term. For some reason, they become totally mismanaged. A financier picks up the assets for a very, affordable price. They end up firing the designers, shut the factories, and then they rent the name out to a licensed manufacturer. Whoever pays the most amount of money to stamp the name of the product, and then basically sell that cheap version of the product to the market. And that works for a period of years until people realize, oh, this isn't the product it used to be, and stop buying it. So it's a short-term strategy that they can run with these sort of older, distressed brands that I call reputation laundering. The second mechanism is something I call phantom competition. So this is what we were talking about, standing in the aisle, you have no idea that all of these seemingly competitive brands are actually owned by the same company. So Excelsior Luxottica own Ray-Ban, Oakley, Persol. Mattresses are crazy for this. So all of the premium names essentially that you see at Mattress Firm, they're all owned by the same manufacturer. In appliances, for example, Whirlpool owns Amana all the way at the bottom end of their offerings, and then Genair all the way at the top. So they own brands on every rung of the price ladder so they can compete all the way. So that's phantom competition. When you're standing in the aisle, it seems like there's all this competition, but the choice is really an illusion. Skimpflation is another mechanism. Everybody's heard of that one, but essentially, you swap materials out on a product for ones that are cheaper and then leave the brand label on there. So backpacks we talked about, that's a really clean example of that. But also food is a great example too. Cisco is a major supplier of over 50% of American restaurants, and they've been doing this sort of skimpflation thing for a long time. There's stories where they've been adding soy filler to ground beef and all sorts of things like that. Next mechanism is what I call warranty theater. So obviously warranties for brands that really stand behind their product, that's a big cost for them, either replacing products or repairing them. And so another strategy brands use is, or conglomerates use when they pick up brands, is to affect the terms of the warranty. They'll shorten the warranty, but also exclude things like normal wear and tear, which is a sort of vacuous claim that's very hard to pin down. So warranty theater is another one. Planned obsolescence is another mechanism people have heard about. Essentially, this is engineering products from the beginning to fail earlier, usually pretty close to the end of the warranty period, so that they can sell you another version. So everybody's heard of planned obsolescence. That's famous in technology products, right? But it also applies in all kinds of consumer goods. And then connected to planned obsolescence is what I call the unfixable failure point. So we're seeing more and more, electronics components being soldered onto boards to make them really impossible to repair, blow molded plastic around components that were once replaceable, that kind of thing. So unfixable failure point. There are a few more. I'm aware now that I've been speaking for like 5 minutes on this point.
No, that's great.
I'll probably pause there, sorry, but there are a few more. If you want to read through all of those, I do keep an up-to-date running list in an article called "The Mechanisms of Enshittification" on the newsletter. So you can check that out as well.
We will definitely link to that, and it is great to keep it as a live resource. And that word enshittification is where I wanted to ask you next, because that's a term that came up a few years ago, specifically related to tech. But you've kind of broadened out that lens to the rest of kind of all our consumer life. Talk a little bit about how your work and Cory Doctorow's work on enshittification kind of fit together.
Cory was the originator of that term, and he first applied it to technology platforms, I suppose. So originally they started out as a fantastic product, helped people connect. The users were sort of the primary the experience of the users, I should say, was the primary kind of goal of these platforms. But then over time, incentives shifted as advertisers, or as the opportunity for advertising became more lucrative on social media platforms. So the incentives shifted, and so user experience became kind of less important to companies like Facebook, Google, and so on. And so over time, we had this kind of slow slide in terms of like user experience and promotion of quality for advertisers rather than users themselves. And so there's been a sort of similar transition, although the reasons for it are a little different. In consumer goods, personally, I think the main driver of reduction in product quality is the increase in consolidation. And so therefore, the widening distance or gap between care of the owners and the product. But what I would say is that they're really connected insofar as the thing that's driving enshittification is this shift in incentives that's happening across the markets in consumer goods.
How complicit would you say consumers are in all of this? I mean, we have become addicted to just in time delivery and low prices and constant novelty. And we're just finding more and more that a lot of people just don't value durability. They don't value anything that's old, anything that has that kind of um, residual. I mean, obviously, within the Collapse Life audience, there's going to be many people who will feel that anything old is going to be better. But we see around us, this rush to just buy dollar store, cheap plastic goods. So, what role do you think consumers actually have to play in this larger theater?
Definitely. I think this is a really important question. And one, I have to admit, I think my thoughts aren't perfectly formulated on this, something I'm still thinking through. So perhaps you and your audience can help me a little bit. But I do think there is something really important to say about how changing consumer psychology, let's say, is affecting these conglomerates' ability to get away with these sorts of tactics, right? And so everything you said is exactly true. It seems like we're consciously deciding and agreeing to trade quality for convenience rather than having something that lasts a long time. I think consumers want something to ensure that they always have the in thing. And I think a lot of that is driven by these new marketing practices, social media marketing, and the comparison games that everybody plays on that, on there, obviously play a role in that. But quantifying those effects is incredibly difficult. I haven't seen any research that does that very well. Everything I know or everything I think about this space is totally anecdotal. So, for example, I'm 31 years old. I've always been someone who's innately interested in how things work. Even as a kid, I was taking things apart. I've always worked on my own cars, for example. But in my generation, I would say I'm probably kind of unusual in that aspect. And, most of my peers don't have those same interests. And so does that say something about how we think about consumer goods as well? And perhaps, people that think the way that we do and that are seeing this kind of decline are in a minority, and perhaps consumers actually are accepting the decline and are trading it for something else, which is convenience and possibly like affordability and that kind of thing. And so I'm sorry I don't have a direct or polemic sort of answer for you on that. I'm definitely still formulating my thoughts, and I think there's very important things to say on it.
Yeah. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I do think there's a piece here, and it's not to lay blame necessarily, but I just think you're right that we're so inundated with advertising in so many ways that we don't even see as advertising anymore. That we're very easily led into thinking that this new product is going to be better. We always associate new with improved,
Right.
and that there might be some sort of fleeting happiness that comes with acquiring a new thing. But that also kind of leads into a slightly more kind of economic question, which is, we're currently facing extreme inflation. And it seems as though, in a way, that this worse on purpose degradation of consumer goods is kind of a form of hidden inflation in a way, because people have to just keep buying again and again, where once years ago, you could have bought that thing maybe twice in your life. Now you have to buy it probably twice a year. So there's almost another form of kind of a hidden tax built in there.
Definitely. And I mean, one of the tips I always give to my readers is um, account for the things you buy over the course of their entire expected life, right? So, in most cases, the expensive thing that you buy today, when you're comparing options, actually ends up being cheaper than the cheaper option over the course of that product's life. And not just the economic point of that, which I think is very astute. That is a hidden, perhaps tax is a better word than inflation, but certainly that exists, but also I think it's a big environmental issue as well. And so if you care about sustainability in the most basic sense, I'm not talking about climate change or anything like that. If you care that a single individual should try to minimize the amount of stuff and waste they put out into the world, then buying quality products is a good idea there too.
Right.
And usually it works out cheaper as well. It's just better all around. So,
It's the difference between how long you hold that thing versus how much you pay up front, right? So
right.
we're again, there's a psychological component where we think, oh my goodness, that costs $149 versus this other one that's $29. I'll take the one that's $29.
Yeah, and there's a vicious cycle there as well, because the manufacturers and the brands, they know that consumer psychology. They know they could make a better product, but they would have to go across that magic three-figure number, let's say, in order to make a decent margin on it. So they would much rather prioritize selling a product for $99, even if they could sell a way better one for $129, because they know the effects of consumer psychology on pricing. And so again, this is another area, going back to your on purpose question, like the incentives result in these outcomes. And yes, someone is making the decision to price at 99 and use the cheaper product, but when you understand the incentives behind that, it's a pretty understandable thing to do in this kind of competitive market. It's just a sad reality, I suppose.
Yeah. Have you ever had a company or a brand that saw your reporting and actually responded to you, either to change something or dispute your findings?
Not yet, although I'm extremely open to that. So I'm a one-person operation, and I'm sure if I haven't made a mistake already, I will make a mistake. And so I'm extremely open to that. What my goal is simply to just be the most accurate, up-to-date, and readable information on consumer products online. And so if I say something incorrect and a brand reaches out to me and corrects the record, I will definitely update that and publish a addendum that's dated with all that stuff as well. So, and everything I write is on public record. I'm not doing any kind of, I don't go to press days. I don't reach out to brands for comments. Everything I report on is you can find in their SEC filings and public information online. And so, yeah, if I do get stuff wrong, definitely reach out, not just brands as well, but readers, anyone. So.
And so the database, the brand ledger database, what information is included in those listings? Is it just about company ownership, or do you make judgments about whether a company is still trustworthy or should be avoided?
Yeah, so right now there are four categories that brands fall into on the ledger. Either they're approved, watch list, former great, or avoid. And so if you're on the approved list, it's really mostly about ownership and incentive structures behind the brand. So I don't have time to test individual products. I don't buy products from each one. That's really not what it's about. It's supposed to be a quick reference to understand the corporate hierarchy and ownership structure behind any one of these brands that you might be looking at in a store. And so for each one of those categories, there are sort of different criteria. For approved, they're still owned by the people who originally made the product. If they're not, they have some kind of control still. So a good example of that is Patagonia. They ended up selling completely to a environmental trust, and the corporate ownership stayed the same. And so that would be an example of a sale where you could pretty well assume that the actual product decision making is not going to change after that point. So they stay approved despite a sale. On the watch list is companies. Usually they're on there because they've changed ownership for some reason, but there hasn't been any kind of like documented quality decline. So trawling, people's comments on Reddit. People are still happy with the way the product's going, but they're still on the watch list because the original owners, the original creators, are no longer the people making the decisions, and so quality decline is certainly possible if that's the case. Former greats, it's kind of like watch list, although these are companies that at one point had a really exceptional reputation. So Porter Cable in the tools side, they were once like the best when it came to woodworkers tools. Nowadays, they're owned by Stanley Black & Decker. They get the former great mark just because the brands are so recognizable. I think that it's important to have them in a different category so people can see those right away. And also buying original things from those brands is always good. So good to have a separate category for them. And then finally, avoid. These are the brands that have very public, documented examples of purposefully worsening products. So these are like the brand licensing plays, apparel companies that have been sold 50 times and have been manufactured in 100 different places last year. Those are the kinds of companies that end up in the avoid list. And so right now it's simply all of those ownership hierarchies mapped in a very easy to sort of follow way, and you get the reasoning behind why each brand is in either one of those categories. In the future, I definitely want to expand that. So I want to include, more sourcing so you can see the original sources for when these transitions happened. Have the ability perhaps for people who are readers and members of the Worse on Purpose community to put their anecdotal reporting on there. I would love at some point to do product reviews because I am really interested in, how things are made and manufacturing processes and design and that kind of thing. But for now, it's very much focused on the ownership structure behind each one of these companies. And basically, I add brands to it. As I do an investigation, I add all the brands that I cover in the investigation to it. So the ledger kind of organically grows over time as I look into more categories. Right now, it's about 350 brands across 7 or 8 categories.
Amazing. When you look at that ownership structure and the consolidation, does it ultimately lead to private equity? Does it ultimately lead to the sort of 3 or 4 companies that everybody is familiar with?
Yeah, it's either private equity, with a specific roll up in a industry, so a roll up strategy that they're running. Usually, like pet care is a great example of that. KKR have bought up, I don't even know what it is today, but thousands of clinics, and then experience economies of scale, reduce costs. That's the strategy. But then also large conglomerates as well do the same thing. So pet care is a great example there. Mars Pet Care, same company that makes the candy bars, but they also own a bunch of pet clinics. They own, pet food manufacturers, a bunch of stuff. So that's not really a private equity play. That's a conglomerate that's built up assets over time and are now investing those assets themselves in order to experience those economies of scale. But ultimately, like, the strategies are the same, right? Whether it's a financier, with a bunch of money, assets under management, coming up with a new play in a new industry, or whether it's a incumbent conglomerate that already exists in that industry. What they're trying to do is, build economies of scale, reduce costs at scale, and then improve margins, and then flip or hold in the case of a conglomerate. But ultimately, the outcome is the same.
Do you think that kind of consolidation is ultimately feasible long term, or does it start to become so kind of heavy and burdensome that that it starts to break apart? I don't know that we've ever seen consolidation at this scale before.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the optimist inside me says if consumers are aware of these mechanisms, then they'll be more likely to make purchasing decisions that avoid these kinds of practices. And then once the money stops flowing in, then these tactics aren't very effective. And at that point, the private equity companies won't do them because profits are all that matter. And so my hope is that as consumers become more aware that this is the mechanism that's reducing the quality of the things they buy, they'll make better purchasing decisions, and that will be what changes the market. But perhaps that's overly optimistic. I mean, a lot of my readers ask why the relevant authorities, I guess that's the FTC in the US, why don't they do more about this? And really, like, I don't know what the answer to that is.
Mm.
I know the
I mean,
US is kind of,
it's not illegal, right? What's happening is
well,
not something that can
no.
necessarily be regulated. It's
And would
just
you want to live in a marketplace where it was illegal, where you could have, a really strong governmental body, that if it's not co-opted today, could be co-opted in the future, that has the ability to step in and stop commerce? Like, potentially that's a slippery slope as well.
yeah.
I know the US has a pretty interesting and unique kind of punk rock history where a lot of these cases were or were brought to court by private plaintiff lawyers who are suing massive corporations for ethical malpractice and all of that. And it seems like all of that has kind of gone out the window. So maybe that's another path to actually doing something about
Mm.
this. And there's a lot of like kind of subtle legal changes that happened, like how class action suits are much more difficult to file these days because every company has you sign like a class waiver on any of those little terms and conditions that you sign. So there are little things that happened in history like that I think had an effect. But really, I want to believe that the individual consumer has the ability to affect change
Mm.
with how they spend their money. And my only hope by writing Worse on Purpose is that we make people think a little bit harder every time they buy something, because there are good alternatives out there. And I really think that's how we can affect change in this domain, because the government ain't going to do shit for us, it seems like.
Absolutely. Amen to that. um, so I think as we draw to a close, you mentioned earlier the sort of philosophical component to the idea of quality. And actually, on your newsletter, you have a wonderful essay titled On Quality, where you describe that some objects actually wear in rather than wear out. Talk a little bit about what you wrote in that essay and the old objects that kind of become more valuable as you use them.
Well, I think the best frame for that is just to frame it in such a way as that we've really lost something in the modern day, in terms of our connection to the things that we own. You touched on it earlier, this sort of rise in consumerism, wanting the in thing. And what I was trying to get at in that essay was that we've lost something really valuable in our relationship with the things that we own. And a lot of that, and that connection is really what drives a lot of the effects that we're seeing today. Because we're unable to build these connections with products and how they work, I really think that's the reason why companies are able to get away with what they are. In the past, when labor was less specialized, people had a general understanding of the things around them and how they worked. Cars are a great example of that. Back in the day, people didn't want all the bells and whistles because they knew those were things that broke. And for the most part, people were working on their own cars. Over time, that changed, as work became more specialized. You just took your car to the mechanic. The service was, simple and easy. It all works really well. But what you lose is an understanding of how the underlying systems in a car work. And if consumers don't have that underlying understanding, then manufacturers can get away with a bunch of stuff, like reducing the quality of those components in order to sell you, a heated steering wheel. And so over time in the car market, if you ask the average consumer, like, what do you want in your new car? The last thing they say is, something that will run for 300,000 miles. What they'll say is like some list of features, like, I want to have a heated steering wheel and, make sure there's room in the back for my dog or my kids or whatever. And the only point I was making in that essay is that, our relation to quality, losing that is basically how we let our guard down when it comes to these products. And so if we want to regain that, we need to build a more intimate connection with the things we own around us. And On Quality, that essay I wrote, was basically a call to do that.
Yeah, I love it. Is there an object that you own that represents genuine quality to you?
Oh, I mean, there are many, but I think the one I always talk about is my Gibson Les Paul studio guitar that my grandma got for me when I was 16 years old. So anyone that knows anything about guitars, it's a Gibson, yes, but it's their like absolute workhorse guitar. So, it's not anything special in terms of the craftsmanship. There's no fine abalone inlays or any beautiful work like that. But what it is just something that just works. And the really beautiful thing about it is that I've owned it now for 16, 17 years. When I was younger, I played in heavy metal bands in my misspent youth. And now looking at that guitar, picking up the object, like all the marks on it, the veneer's been rubbed away by my belt buckle from all those years. And so now it's an object that when I look at it, it's like, it just speaks to me. It tells stories, and, it takes me back to a place every time I play it. And, it's an object that has so much more meaning beyond, the thing it is in the first place. And I think, it used to be that basically everything you owned was that. There was a time when everything is created by some craftsman or an artisan, so everything had a story behind it. Every object you bought, you intended to own, either until you passed or the object itself broke for whatever reason. And so, yeah, I do think there's something beautiful we've lost in that. And you could say the same about our connection to nature, for example. Like, we've lost that too, and this is just another aspect of that connection to nature, a connection to things we own.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I'm so glad that we discovered it. And I'm so glad that you came and had this chat with us. And hopefully now many more people will actually come and read your work. So remind people how they can find you and follow along and also support you, because I believe that Worse on Purpose is reader supported, isn't it?
Yep, that's right. We're totally reader funded, so no sponsorship, no ads, no anything. In terms of where to find us, you can find Worse on Purpose at worseonpurpose.com. Sign up for the newsletter there, so you'll get every investigation in your inbox. If you want to check out the ledger, you can find that at ledger.worseonpurpose.com. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Keyana Sapp. That's Keyana Sapp. And if you're more of a Blue Sky person, I post at Worse on Purpose on Blue Sky as well.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much for spending this time with us, and we wish you all the best with this project.
Thank you so much for having me, Zahra. This was really fun.
It's a pleasure. And thank you all for being with us for another conversation about our changing political, economic, and social order. We're so grateful that you joined us. If you're not already on the list, please head over to collapselife.com and subscribe. Free subscribers get our latest reporting and analysis, and paid subscribers receive deeper investigations, practical resources, and the knowledge they're supporting independent reporting and writing. If a paid subscription doesn't fit your budget right now, but you would like to support our work, you can make a one-time contribution using the donate button at the top of our homepage. Either way, thank you so much for being on this journey with us. Until next week, just keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.